Jungkook finally opens up about Taehyung in a jaw-dropping confession. What he says leaves the entire room frozen in disbelief. The microphone trembled in Jungkook's hand. The studio lights overhead were hot and blinding, but not nearly as suffocating as the question that had just been asked. Do you still talk to Taehyung? Silence. He blinked once, twice, and stared at the reporter in front of him as if the entire room had warped into a place he didn't recognize. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. Then Jungkook leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, shoulders tightening like a bow pulled taut. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it sliced through the stillness like glass. You really want to know? He asked, not smiling. No one breathed. Cameras blinked red, recording. The team behind the scenes leaned in, waiting. Everyone expected a deflection, maybe a short laugh, or even a playful, "Let's not go there." But Jungkook didn't blink away the question. His fingers curled around the edge of the armrest, and his throat worked like something had clawed its way up from the past and lodged behind his tongue. I haven't talked to him in a year. Not since. The night everything ended, the air shifted. Something heavy dropped in the pit of the room. The reporter didn't speak, eyes wide. Jungkook exhaled shakily, gaze unfocused. Not on any one person, more like staring through time itself. You all thought we were fine, that it was just distance, tours, schedules. But people don't just vanish from each other's lives for no reason. He paused. The room was frozen in a collective, invisible inhale. I loved him. I still might, he added, voice cracking at the edge. But we were never built to survive the truth. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were glossy. You think love protects you. You think it forgives. But sometimes, it's not enough. He sat back, fist clenched now in his lap. Somewhere in the control booth, a producer silently gestured to cut to break. But the cameras kept rolling. Jungkook continued anyway, like he had been waiting, aching for this moment. Not for the world, but for himself. You want the story? Fine. Here's the truth. We weren't just close. We weren't just bandmates. We were everything until we weren't. And just like that, the dam broke. The rest of the interview was never meant to be public, but it leaked. Fans watched in stunned disbelief as Jungkook detailed a history hidden beneath public smiles. Quiet nights backstage, secret notes exchanged under hotel doors, silent fights with no words, only looks that burn like betrayal. His voice trembled only once when he described the last moment they shared. It was raining. He was wearing the black hoodie I gave him. He looked back before walking away, but didn't stop. The confession sent shockwaves. News outlets dissected every frame. Fans pulled apart lyrics, old posts, glances caught on stage. Speculation turned into mourning. There was grief in the fandom now, like everyone had just lost something too beautiful to hold. But what they didn't see was the aftermath. Jungkook left the studio alone that night. Hoodie up, no guards, no van. He walked aimlessly, the neon blur of Seoul dancing like ghosts in his peripheral vision. He ended up at a bar neither of them had visited in over 2 years. The same booth, the same drink order. No words, no cameras. He sat there for hours. The bartender didn't ask questions. Back home, his phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from Hybe. Taehyung's name trending. Headlines screaming about love, loss, betrayal. But Jungkook didn't care. He finally said it. And in doing so, he'd ripped open a wound that had festered far too long in silence. The next day, he posted a single story on Instagram. A Polaroid unlabeled, untouched. Taehyung's smile, the kind that didn't look rehearsed. No caption. The internet went into flames. But Jungkook, sitting at the edge of his bed, wasn't looking at reactions. He was staring at an old notebook filled with Taehyung's handwriting. Sketches, inside jokes, half-finished lyrics. All dated, all forgotten. Until now, he picked up a pen. Beneath the last scribble, he wrote, I wish we could have tried again before we broke. The pen trembled slightly in Jungkook's hand as he sat alone in his studio. The warm light overhead casting a soft glow on his jawline, his reflection faint in the window behind him. Outside, Seoul buzzed quietly oblivious to the storm brewing inside this quiet, soundproof room. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. On the desk beside him lay the notebook, Taehyung's handwriting sprawling across old pages like ghosts that refused to be silenced. The last page still glowed in his memory. The sentence he'd written hours earlier clung to his chest like smoke. I wish we could have tried again before we broke. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. He wasn't ready to deal with HYBE's frantic PR team, the explosion online, the hashtags that were now trending across 3 continents. Number Jungkook and Taehyung. Number JK Confession. Number Was It Real armies were piecing together everything from fan cams, old interviews, distant glances caught in passing. But none of them knew what really happened the night everything collapsed. His mind dragged him back, kicking and screaming into the past. The final night of the tour. Thunder cracked across the sky as if the universe itself knew what was coming. The afterparty was crowded, filled with noise, lights, and the smell of champagne and wet asphalt. Jungkook had been scanning the crowd for what felt like hours, body moving but mind trapped in a loop. Every time someone called his name, it broke into that cycle, but only briefly. Where was Taehyung? He found him eventually alone on the balcony, cigarette between his fingers, staring at the dark city like he was already gone. "Why didn't you answer my calls?" Jungkook had asked, voice lower than usual. Taehyung didn't look at him. The rain had started to mist, and it clung to his lashes like fragile silver. "I didn't want to lie to you," he murmured. Jungkook's heart skipped. "About what?" Taehyung finally looked over. "That I was going to leave." Jungkook didn't move. His breath caught halfway in his chest. "Leave? What? The party? The group?" Silence. The cigarette dropped from Taehyung's hand, extinguishing against the wet floor with a soft hiss. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "Not like this. Not in secret. Not when every time I look at you, I have to pretend we're just brothers." Jungkook reached for him instinctively. His fingers wrapped around Taehyung's wrist, but it felt like trying to hold on to fog. "We can talk to HYBE. We can figure it out." "You don't get it," Taehyung snapped, voice raw. "This isn't about them. It's about me. I'm tired of loving you in pieces." Jungkook staggered back a step. "You think I don't want you whole?" he whispered. Taehyung turned his face away. "I think it's too late." That was the last time they spoke. The sound of raindrops against the studio window snapped Jungkook back to the present. His eyes were red not from crying, but from the weight of holding everything in for so long. He stood up slowly, the chair creaking beneath him, and walked toward the window. Seoul had blurred under the downpour, just like that night. He opened the window. The smell of rain hit him instantly, earthy, clean, bittersweet. He let it wash over him. It had been almost a year, since the night on the balcony, since the silence began. He thought about Taehyung every day, in small, cruel ways. The sound of a laugh that echoed like his, the way someone slung their jacket over one shoulder, the feel of warm tea in the morning that reminded him of late-night talks in hotels across the world. They had shared something unnameable, and then they lost it. But love doesn't just evaporate. It stains. He turned back to his desk and sat down again. His fingers reached for his phone this time, not to scroll, not to read the articles blowing up, but to open a draft message that had been sitting unsent for months. The contact still read, V. He stared at the blinking cursor, unsure what to type. Every word felt too heavy or too light. Finally, he just wrote, I meant it. Everything. Even now. He hovered over the send button, paused, deleted the message. Instead, he opened the voice recorder and began to speak. 3 days later, the voice note leaked. Fans weren't supposed to hear it. He hadn't even meant to send it. It was saved privately. A stream of consciousness monologue meant for no one but the void. But somehow, it spread, and once it did, nothing could stop the avalanche. I never stopped loving him. The recording began. Jungkook's voice soft and husky, threaded with something more dangerous than anger, regret. He used to hum when he was nervous. Did you know that? Always the same melody. I can't hear it without thinking of hotel corridors and stolen moments, of all the places we weren't allowed to touch. The fandom went wild. Clips of the audio looped over TikToks, news sites debated its implications, and even other celebrities chimed in with vague tweets and cryptic posts. But behind all the noise, something deeper happened. Taehyung went silent. No posts, no stories, no lives. And then one morning, Jungkook's doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, he froze. Taehyung stood there. No cameras, no entourage. Just soaked from the rain, hoodie clinging to his frame, and eyes that hadn't changed in all this time. "Can I come in?" he asked. Jungkook didn't answer. He stepped aside. Taehyung entered slowly, like someone walking into a house that had burned down and been rebuilt brick by brick. The door closed. Neither spoke at first. Then Jungkook broke the silence. "You listened to it?" Taehyung nodded once. "I listened to it 100 times. Jungkook swallowed. "And?" Taehyung's voice cracked when he spoke. "And I never stopped loving you either." It wasn't cinematic. There were no grand gestures, no sweeping music. Just two people staring at each other, the space between them still crackling with everything unsaid. Jungkook stepped forward first. Taehyung didn't move. Until Jungkook reached out and touched his hand. Warmth. Real. Present. After everything, time, distance, pain, they were still standing here. Still reaching. Still human. Still holding on. Jungkook didn't realize he was still holding Taehyung's hand until he felt the subtle tremor running through the other's fingertips. It was the same hand that used to tug at his sleeve during late-night rehearsals. The same hand that once cupped his cheek in silence. When words failed them both, he looked up and found Taehyung watching him with the kind of expression that once shattered him, soft, pleading, and so full of sorrow it ached behind Jungkook's ribs. They didn't speak for several seconds. The rain kept tapping against the window like a soundtrack written for this exact moment. The room smelled like bergamot and dust and something else, something deeply human like longing that had been sealed in and left to ferment. Taehyung's lips parted like he wanted to say something, but the words never quite arrived. So Jungkook did the only thing he could. He let go of his hand slowly and turned toward the living room, not bothering to ask if Taehyung would follow. He did. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, bodies angled like magnets, caught in hesitation, eyes flickering toward one another but never locking fully. Jungkook leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring down at the floor with a furrow between his brows so tight it looked like it had been carved in by years of restraint. Taehyung leaned back, arms crossed over his chest, breathing carefully as if one wrong exhale might detonate everything again. "When did you know?" Jungkook asked quietly, still not looking at him. Taehyung didn't pretend not to understand. "That I was going to walk away?" he asked, voice hoarse. Jungkook nodded. Taehyung sighed, a slow, sinking sound. "The day you chose silence over me." Jungkook flinched. It wasn't fair, but it was true. Back then, when the rumors had started swirling like vultures, when tabloids questioned their closeness and hashtags like Taekook exposed trended for weeks, Jungkook had shut down. He'd gone mute in the face of pressure, scared that speaking up would kill the fragile thing they'd built. Taehyung had wanted to fight. Jungkook had wanted to hide. "I was scared," Jungkook whispered. "I was too," Taehyung admitted. "But I still wanted you louder than my fear." That made Jungkook look up, finally. Their eyes met, and the charge in the room shifted like static caught between two wires. There was so much in that look. Anger, hurt, longing, confusion, and something else still raw and red and bleeding. Jungkook felt like he was standing in front of a mirror that only reflected the parts he tried to bury. "I thought protecting you meant letting go," he said. Taehyung let out a humorless laugh. "You think I needed protecting? I needed you." The silence after that wasn't empty. It was heavy. Heavy with every missed call, every glance avoided at award shows, every lyric written but never sung aloud. Jungkook's fingers twitched on his knees. His throat burned. There were too many apologies stuck inside him, and not enough language to make them whole. "I watched your solo stages," Taehyung said after a while. "Every one of them." Jungkook blinked. "Why?" "Because I miss the way you move when you forget people are watching," Taehyung replied. "Because no matter how far we ran, you still danced like you were speaking to me." Jungkook's eyes burned. He didn't try to hide it. For once, he let himself be bare. And I kept hoping you'd be in the crowd. I was, Taehyung whispered. Always. A shaky breath left Jungkook's chest, and he finally sat back, his body sinking into the couch like he had just dropped 1,000 pounds of memory. You know I kept your hoodie, he said quietly. The black one. Still smells like the cologne you used back then. I used to put it on when I couldn't sleep. Taehyung's lips trembled. I left it behind on purpose. That admission hit harder than it should have. Jungkook looked over at him, and this time, he didn't look away. Do you regret it? Jungkook asked. Taehyung hesitated. Which part? Leaving. Us. Everything. Taehyung looked at him for a long moment before answering. No, he said softly. I regret not making you choose me sooner. And there it was. The knife. Not sharp, but slow. And yet, Jungkook didn't bleed resentment, only understanding. Because the truth was, he hadn't chosen. He'd let the silence swallow them both, let management script their stories, let fear ghostwrite his decisions. He'd chosen survival over truth. I choose you now, Jungkook said, voice barely audible. Taehyung's eyes shimmered, not with disbelief, but something closer to grief. Why now? Because for the first time, Jungkook murmured, I'm not afraid to lose anything else except you. That broke whatever resolve was left between them. Taehyung moved first, leaning forward, the distance between them finally dissolving. His hand reached out and found Jungkook's jaw, fingers tracing a path like he was relearning topography long forgotten. Jungkook closed his eyes at the touch. I used to kiss you here, Taehyung said, brushing a thumb beneath Jungkook's lower lip. You can, Jungkook whispered, but Taehyung didn't. Instead, he rested his forehead against Jungkook's, the kind of touch that said more than mouths ever could. For a while, they sat like that, breathing each other in, mending in silence. The room was filled with ghosts, but neither of them felt haunted anymore. Later that night, they didn't sleep. They stayed curled on the couch, sharing stories they'd never told, laughing at things that used to hurt, crying when memories crawled out from the cracks. Jungkook played him a song he had never released, a song Taehyung inspired. Taehyung showed him sketches of a photo book he had wanted to dedicate to someone unnamed. Morning came with a soft pink glow through the window, and neither of them noticed the time. I don't know what happens next, Taehyung said quietly, sipping tea Jungkook had made him. I don't know how the world will react, or what Hybe will do. Jungkook nodded. Me neither, but I want to find out. Together. And that was enough. Not a fairy tale. Not perfection, but honest, real, and finally, theirs. The soft rustle of morning filtered through the half-open window, carrying with it the scent of fresh rain and distant traffic, the ordinary sounds of a city that kept moving, oblivious to the storm of healing unfolding in that quiet apartment. Jungkook stood by the kitchen counter, pouring hot water over the last of his loose-leaf tea, watching it swirl and darken in the glass like memories thickening with time. He could feel Taehyung's presence behind him, could hear the way he shifted in the seat, the creak of the couch, the soft exhale that told him Taehyung was watching, not just looking, but watching, the way someone only does when they're memorizing something they thought they'd never see again. You still like chamomile? Jungkook asked without turning around. Taehyung hummed. Only when it's made by you. There was a time that sentence would have made Jungkook blush, avert his eyes, laugh it off with some dumb joke. But not this morning. This morning, he turned around and looked at Taehyung with eyes that no longer hid. The tea in his hand trembled slightly as he walked it over and placed it in front of him, their fingers grazing again intentionally this time. Taehyung took the mug, but didn't drink. He stared into the steam like it might offer answers. Jungkook sat beside him, the space between their bodies small now, charged, but gentle. I dreamt of you, Taehyung said suddenly, voice lower than before, as if afraid to startle the moment. Jungkook tilted his head. When? Almost every night, but one kept coming back. Taehyung took a sip, then set the mug down. We were on a train, just the two of us, It was snowing outside. You were asleep on my shoulder. Jungkook watched him. What happened? The train never stopped, Taehyung said. It kept going, and I didn't want it to stop. Not because of where we were going, but because for once, we were moving together. Jungkook blinked slowly, his chest tightening. What woke you up? Taehyung looked at him then, and something broke open in his gaze. The sound of you letting go. Jungkook reached out instinctively, threading his fingers through Taehyung's hand, grounding them both in the present. I'm not letting go anymore. Taehyung didn't speak. He just held on. The day moved around them like water, slow, gentle, steady. They didn't rush. They didn't pretend it hadn't been hard. Taehyung showed Jungkook the text he'd written and never sent. Jungkook played a voice memo he'd recorded the night he thought he'd never see him again. It was raw. It was ugly. It was real. You once told me, Taehyung murmured as they lay on the floor later, arms brushing, that if things were different, we would have gone to Paris. I still think about it, Jungkook whispered. The Seine, that old bridge, your camera, my guitar. Taehyung turned to face him. Let's go, Jungkook blinked. What? Let's go to Paris, he repeated firmer. Not to escape, but to live. Just for a week, or two. Just us. Jungkook searched his eyes. And after? We come back, Taehyung said. We face whatever comes, together. For the first time in a long time, Jungkook smiled without restraint. Okay. It took only 4 days. 4 days for the news to explode, for headlines to catch wind of sightings. Taehyung at Incheon Airport with sunglasses and a scarf. Jungkook spotted hours later at the same gate. Fans posted blurry photos. Theories ran wild. Articles speculated a comeback, a collaboration, a scandal, but none of them knew. None of them understood the quiet freedom in the way Taehyung laughed on the plane when Jungkook spilled coffee on his passport. None of them saw the way Jungkook leaned his head on Taehyung's shoulder during the flight and finally slept for the first time in weeks. Paris was cold when they landed. The kind of cold that kissed your skin and demanded layers. But it was beautiful. Golden light filtered through bare trees. The river glistened. The city held stories in its stones. They stayed in a small apartment near Rue Claire. No staff, no assistants, just the two of them. Taehyung brought his camera. Jungkook brought a journal. They wandered the streets like they were rediscovering color. Taehyung photographed everything, shadows on cobblestones, lovers kissing on street corners, Jungkook feeding pigeons with a crooked smile. Jungkook wrote lyrics in his notebook, sometimes pausing mid-sentence to sketch Taehyung's profile from across the room. One night, they found a hidden jazz bar beneath a bookstore. The music was rich and slow. Jungkook stood up, took Taehyung's hand, and asked him to dance. No one's watching, he whispered. Taehyung didn't hesitate. They danced like they used to before the fame, before the world, just swaying in each other's arms, hearts sinking beat by beat. And when the song ended, Jungkook kissed him, not hard, not desperate, just enough to say, I'm still here. It was the kiss that fans had only imagined. The kind they wrote fanfics about, posted threads trying to decode. But it wasn't for them. It was for the boys who fell in love between rehearsals and late-night ramen, who hurt each other without meaning to, who spent years choosing silence when they should have chosen each other. Back in Seoul, the photos eventually surfaced. A blurry image of Jungkook and Taehyung holding hands on a bridge in Paris. No statement was made. Hybe declined to comment. But the internet didn't care. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't need to be said. It just needs to be seen. And for the first time, the world saw it clearly. Not a scandal, not a betrayal, but a love that survived. When they returned, everything had changed and nothing had. They went back to schedules, to cameras, to stages. But now, they moved differently. Jungkook stood closer. Taehyung smiled more. In interviews, their eyes found each other like gravity. One night, Jungkook posted a video. A simple melody. Him at the piano. No lyrics, just emotion. Taehyung reposted it with a caption, "For the train that never stops." And Jungkook replied, I'll never get off. They didn't need to announce anything. They didn't need a label. All they needed was each other. And finally, they had that. There was a heaviness that lifted with every passing day they spent side by side, not because the world had stopped watching, but because they had stopped hiding. It wasn't about announcements or defining lines anymore. It was about living moments completely, even if the world outside didn't understand them. Taehyung was humming again. Not for the cameras, not for a live stream, but to himself, in the middle of the kitchen, barefoot, while flipping pancakes too late in the afternoon. Jungkook watched from the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, a towel slung over his shoulder. The sound wasn't perfect. It cracked on the higher notes, wavered on the ends, but it was honest, familiar, and it filled the space with something warmer than music. Love never left. It had just gotten quieter. Jungkook walked over without a word and leaned his chin on Taehyung's shoulder. Taehyung didn't stop flipping the pancake. He just smiled without turning. The sunlight came in sharp from the window, catching in his lashes, the faint shimmer of oil on his skin making him look almost unreal. But Jungkook had spent enough time remembering him to know that this was better than any fantasy his memory had ever offered. Taehyung handed him the spatula without speaking. Jungkook took it, understanding immediately.
"You're not going to cook," Taehyung teased gently as he walked away, stretching his arms toward the ceiling and then dropping onto the couch with a thud. "You're going to burn it again and say it. Rustic." Jungkook grinned. "That was one time. It was 3 times, I kept count. I was trying to impress you. You succeeded, but my stomach hated you for a week." The sound of laughter was free, full. The kind of laughter that didn't need a reason, only presence. It echoed off the walls like a song they had been writing for years and finally found the chorus to. They spent the rest of the day doing everything and nothing, walking around aimlessly in thick coats and matching scarves, sharing coffee from one cup, buying postcards they never planned to mail. They took photos, but not for the internet, just for themselves. Taehyung captured Jungkook mid-laugh in front of a flower stall. Jungkook caught Taehyung reaching for a stray cat, face soft and unaware. They didn't look like idols. They didn't look like exes. They looked like a story that had taken too long to write but had finally found its voice. That evening, as they lay tangled in blankets, a movie playing muted in the background, Taehyung turned on his side and reached out. His fingers brushed Jungkook's jaw. He didn't say anything. He just looked at him, really looked, and Jungkook felt his heart shift. Not a flutter, a full movement, like something inside had settled into place after years of drifting. "I was scared you'd forget me," Taehyung whispered. "I never did," Jungkook replied. "I remembered you in everything." Taehyung traced the curve of his lip with a fingertip. "Even when you hated me." "I never hated you. I hated how much I missed you." Their lips met, not in urgency, not in desperation, but with the gentle reverence of forgiveness, of familiarity. The kiss was quiet, mouths brushing like a conversation made of silences and sighs. When they parted, Taehyung rested his forehead against Jungkook. Their noses touched. Their breaths synced. Everything else fell away. The following morning, the Paris rain returned. They didn't mind. They walked through it anyway, coats soaked through, hands still clasped tightly like anchors. They ended up in a bookstore, ducking beneath the awning as the bell above the door jingled behind them. It was the kind of place with uneven floorboards and handwritten labels, the smell of old paper rising like incense. Taehyung wandered toward the poetry section while Jungkook stayed by the vinyls. When they met in the middle, both were holding books. "This one's for you," Taehyung said, handing over a slim volume of Rilke. Jungkook smiled. "You always pick the sad ones." "You like sad," Taehyung replied, brushing a kiss to his cheek. "Sad is real." They bought the books and walked to a bench near the river. The rain had softened into mist. People passed by, umbrellas up, no one recognizing them in their simplicity. For a moment, they could have been anyone. 2 boys with books and too many emotions, trying to make sense of something as old as time. Taehyung leaned his head on Jungkook's shoulder and read aloud. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage. Jungkook closed his eyes. You were never a dragon. Taehyung's voice dropped to a whisper. You were. They both laughed quietly, and then, without warning, Taehyung reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. I wrote this the day you released that voice memo, Taehyung said, but I never sent it. Jungkook unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. The first line hit him like lightning. I hated you for making me love you so quietly. He read the rest in silence, the words curling around his heart like ivy. Each sentence felt like a confession wrapped in thorns, delicate and sharp. He finished reading and looked up with wet eyes. You should have sent it. I didn't know if you wanted to hear it. Jungkook shook his head, folded the letter again and tucked it into his coat. I always wanted to hear everything. When they returned to Seoul, it wasn't dramatic. There were no grand declarations. They slipped back into the rhythm of work, of lights and cameras and rehearsals, but people noticed. The way they sat closer, the way Taehyung laughed louder, the way Jungkook's gaze lingered longer. And one day, during a live broadcast, someone asked Jungkook, "What's the one thing you wish you could say to someone from your past?" He didn't hesitate. Come back, he said, eyes soft, but this time stay. Taehyung, watching from backstage, smiled so hard it hurt. Because this time he would. They both would, of course. Here is the next continuation in immersive cinematic English prose, seamlessly following the emotional and narrative thread, without interruptions, labels, or formatting elements. The story deepens the emotional growth, character reflection, and resolution of Jungkook and Taehyung's reconnection, with layered internal and external dynamics, shown rather than told. The world didn't stop for their reunion. That was perhaps the most grounding part. Even as the whispers multiplied and headlines twisted reality into speculation, Seoul continued moving, unbothered by two boys who had once fallen apart and found their way back in the quiet spaces between chords and glances. There was no grand banner, no official statement, just the gradual, visible return of something unspoken between them that had never fully died. It was there in the way Jungkook laughed more freely, and the way Taehyung seemed to breathe deeper when Jungkook entered a room. It was in the smallest, most insignificant places, like a scarf draped over a microphone stand backstage, or two coffee mugs on the studio desk when only one was officially scheduled to be there. And yet there were questions. Jungkook could feel them gathering around the corners of every photo shoot, every press meeting, every carefully worded interview. No one dared to ask directly, not yet, but the eyes said enough. So did the lingering silences whenever a reporter brought up Taehyung's name and Jungkook's fingers stiffened slightly, betraying more than he said. HYBE had called them both in. The meeting was not dramatic, no shouting, no threats. Just a cold, sterile room, a long glass table, and eyes that watched them like risks rather than people. The manager leaned forward, fingers laced together. You both know how much we've invested in your individual images, he said. The last thing we need is a distraction. We've seen the Paris photos, so has everyone else. Neither of them responded. We're not telling you what to do, another executive added, voice softer. We're asking you to be aware, carefully aware. The world isn't always kind. Taehyung's voice was steady. We're not asking it to be kind, just honest. Jungkook didn't speak. He didn't have to. His hand was already under the table, resting near Taehyung's, their pinkies brushing, anchoring them both. When the meeting ended, no verdict was given, no decision, just quiet tension left hanging in the air, but it didn't shake them. Because for once, there was nothing more dangerous than pretending they were strangers. In the days that followed, they worked like usual recordings, shoots, planning sessions, but at night they created something else, something just theirs. Jungkook brought home a beat one evening, fingers itching. Taehyung heard it through the bedroom wall and walked out without a word, barefoot, hair messy, grabbing the nearest pen. They wrote until dawn, not about love, not about pain, but about the space between. The tension, the ache, the silence, the return. Jungkook sang the hook. Taehyung whispered the bridge. It was unlike anything they'd released before, raw, cinematic, restrained. One night, Jungkook sat on the rooftop, hoodie pulled over his head, knees drawn up. Taehyung joined him without asking. The sky above them was soft with the kind of stars that only showed after too much rain. Jungkook was quiet for a long time. "I used to hate this rooftop," he said. "I stood up here the night you walked away. Thought if I stood still long enough, you'd come back." Taehyung leaned his head on his shoulder. "I did, just later than I should have." Jungkook turned toward him, eyes catching the dim city glow. "If we hadn't been forced to lie back then, if we had just said it out loud, we might have lost everything," Taehyung finished. "Or we might have kept each other." There was no answer to that. Only the wind tugging at their sleeves and the warmth between their bodies, stubborn and constant. The song they created leaked. Not by accident, not officially either. An anonymous drop, a midnight post, no name, no cover, just a single track titled Still. Fans knew immediately. The internet shattered. People dissected every lyric. The bridge broke hearts. Jungkook's voice cracked mid-chorus. Taehyung's harmony came in like breath after drowning. It wasn't a love song. It was a survival song. The kind written after war, after silence, after rebuilding ruins by hand. Neither of them acknowledged the drop. But a week later, they performed it. Live. No introduction, no explanation. The lights were low, just two silhouettes against a sea of blue light sticks. The crowd didn't scream, they didn't chant, they listened, and they wept. After the final note, Jungkook turned toward Taehyung on stage. They looked at each other for a moment longer than rehearsed. Taehyung smiled. Jungkook smiled back. Then he leaned in and whispered something only Taehyung could hear. The cameras didn't catch it. But Taehyung's eyes glossed. And the crowd felt it. That night they left in the same car. No hiding, no rush, just exhaustion and peace woven together. In the days that followed, they began to reclaim what had been taken. Not just love, but narrative. Taehyung began posting photos with no filters again. Jungkook shared a video of them playing video games, Taehyung groaning dramatically every time he lost. They started showing up together in cafes, not hand in hand, not performative, just present, real. And when an interviewer finally dared to ask, "Is there something going on between you two?" Jungkook just smiled. "There always has been." It wasn't a confession. It was a reclaiming. From that point on, they didn't have to say anything more. They kept working. They kept loving. They kept existing in that thin, beautiful space where two hearts finally stopped running in opposite directions. They spent time at the studio less for deadlines and more for discovery. Taehyung wrote about rain again. Jungkook wrote about fire. Their new tracks carried shadows of the past but were rooted firmly in the present. They no longer sounded like boys who were afraid. They sounded like men who had lived through it and chosen each other anyway. Months later, during a surprise fan event, someone asked what they'd tell their younger selves. Jungkook took the mic slowly, thoughtful. "I'd tell him to speak." Taehyung added, voice steady, "And I'd tell him it's okay to be heard." The cheers were loud, but not as loud as the quiet comfort that spread in their smiles afterward. And then one morning, almost a year after the Paris trip, a post appeared. A simple photo, 2 mugs, 2 rings, no caption. It didn't trend, it exploded. But neither of them checked the numbers. They were in the kitchen again, pancakes slightly burned, music playing low, windows open. Jungkook had his arms around Taehyung's waist, swaying lazily, singing off-key on purpose just to make him laugh. Taehyung kept trying to focus on the pan but gave up entirely when Jungkook kissed the back of his neck. Outside, the world continued. News kept spinning. But inside that small apartment, everything had finally slowed. And this time, neither of them let go. The sound of birds filtered through the open kitchen window as the early morning sun pooled across the tiled floor like melted gold. Taehyung stood barefoot by the counter, shoulders draped in one of Jungkook's oversized sweatshirts, sleeves dangling past his fingers as he stirred milk into the coffee. The scent of cinnamon lingered faintly in the air, carried by the soft breeze that fluttered the hem of the curtain behind him. He could hear Jungkook somewhere down the hall, half singing, half talking to himself as he rummaged through drawers, probably looking for his other sock. There was a stillness in the apartment now, the kind that had taken months to earn. A stillness that wasn't absence but presence. No longer heavy with avoidance or fear, but quietly full of everything unspoken that had found a safe place to rest. Taehyung closed his eyes and listened to the rustle of fabric, the gurgle of the coffee maker, the occasional curse from Jungkook followed by a laugh. These were the sounds of a life that didn't need defining anymore. A life rebuilt from scratch, not perfect but real. When Jungkook finally padded into the kitchen, his hair was still damp, sticking up at odd angles, his shirt mismatched with his sweatpants. He looked like a painting rendered in soft brush strokes, bare skin, sleepy eyes, silver earring catching a glint of light as he walked. Taehyung slid him a cup without speaking. "You found it," Jungkook mumbled as he took the coffee. "Middle drawer," Taehyung replied. "You really should stop throwing your socks in every possible direction when you undress. Where's the fun in that?" They sat in comfortable silence at the tiny breakfast table, knees brushing under the wood. Jungkook took a sip and then rested his mug against his cheek with a small sigh. His gaze drifted toward the window. "Do you think we'll ever stop being a headline?" Taehyung traced his finger along the rim of his mug, thoughtful. "Maybe not, but I stopped living for the silence of others a long time ago." Jungkook turned to him then, studying his profile. The relaxed jaw, the shadow of stubble, the piece carved into every angle of his face. It amazed him still, how Taehyung had returned not just to be loved, but to love back with both hands open. He reached across the table, wrapping his hand around Taehyung's wrist, thumb brushing gently against the delicate skin just below his palm. "I don't want to spend another year pretending we're only okay in the shadows." Taehyung's eyes lifted to meet his. "Then don't." Jungkook's phone buzzed once, then again, then a third time. He ignored it. A fourth buzz. Taehyung leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "You should check that, could be an emergency." Jungkook sighed and picked it up. A string of messages lit the screen. Manager, PR team, production staff, all saying the same thing: the label wants to meet. Urgent, regarding the leak. Taehyung must have read the tension in Jungkook's silence because he pushed his chair back slowly. "Let me guess. They finally want to talk about Still. They're calling it reckless." It was honest. They think honesty costs too much. Taehyung stood and crossed to the sink, pouring out the rest of his coffee. His movements were careful, deliberate. Then maybe they're still measuring the wrong things. Jungkook watched him, heart thick with admiration and something sharper, protectiveness. He had spent so long trying to shield Taehyung from the weight of consequence, only to learn that Taehyung had never needed protection. He had needed partnership, and now he had it. The meeting wasn't kind. They sat across from a table of executives who looked more exhausted than angry, their voices clinical, sharp, precise. Jungkook and Taehyung didn't flinch. They listened. They nodded. And when it was finally their turn to speak, it was Jungkook who leaned forward. It was Taehyung. "I think," he said slowly, "what you're afraid of is not the damage we've caused. It's the control we've reclaimed." One of the older producers adjusted his glasses, exhaling. "You two are powerful, you know that. What you represent matters." Jungkook met his eyes evenly. "What we represent is truth. You built a brand around our closeness, and now you're panicking because we made it real." There was silence. A long, humming, undeniable silence. And then the legal representative, a woman who had been mostly silent until now, spoke softly. They love you. You know that, don't you? The fans. They're not running from this. They're running to it. Jungkook's shoulders relaxed a fraction. Taehyung offered a nod of quiet thanks. The meeting ended with no signatures, no statements, just the beginning of a very different kind of understanding. Afterward, they walked side by side through the underground parking garage, not speaking. Jungkook kept his hand close to Taehyung, without actually reaching. When they got into the car, it was Taehyung who spoke first. We could go away again. Where? Anywhere doesn't matter. Someplace quiet, no stylists, no interviews, just air. Jungkook closed his eyes, leaning his head against the headrest. I want that, but I don't want to run, not anymore. Taehyung was quiet for a beat. Then he turned the key in the ignition and said, then let's walk instead. Their second escape wasn't dramatic. No paparazzi, no midnight flights. Just a small town a few hours outside Seoul, where the hills turned golden at dusk and the sky opened wide and slow. They stayed in a guest house run by a retired poet and his wife, both of whom offered them tea without questions. The days passed like breath, long hikes, quiet bookstores, late nights singing with Taehyung's guitar balanced on his knee and Jungkook sketching lyrics in the corner of his journal. No deadlines, no clock. One morning, Taehyung woke to the smell of firewood and the sound of wind chimes. He turned in the bed and found Jungkook already up, hair messy, hoodie draped around him like a blanket, sitting at the window watching the fog lift. I wrote you a song, Jungkook said without turning. Taehyung slid closer, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. Play it for me. Jungkook turned to him, eyes shining with something soft and infinite. No, I want to play it with you. Taehyung smiled. Then teach me the chords. They spent the afternoon learning each other all over again through music. The way they used to. The way that never stopped being theirs. Jungkook sang lead. Taehyung wove harmonies between the notes, their voices rising and falling like a tide neither could control, but trusted anyway. That night they sat outside on the porch, wrapped in blankets, wine glasses half full and stars burning silently above them. Taehyung leaned into Jungkook's side, head on his chest. What do you want this to become? He asked softly. Jungkook kissed his hair. Ours, nothing else matters. Taehyung nodded. Then I'll stay. He didn't just mean tonight. He meant tomorrow. And everyone after. And Jungkook knew with absolute certainty that this time they both would. The wind shifted that night, soft and full of promises it didn't need to keep. The mountain air was colder now, brushing against their skin like memory, gentle but sharp enough to be felt. Jungkook adjusted the blanket draped over both their shoulders, pulling Taehyung closer as if the world might try to steal him away again in the hush of dawn. But Taehyung didn't move. He stayed tucked against Jungkook's chest, heartbeat steady, breaths quiet, like his entire body had finally found a rhythm it could rest in. Neither of them spoke for a long time. There was no need. Language between them had always existed outside words, in glances, in pauses, in the way Jungkook's fingers brushed the back of Taehyung's hand without thinking, in the way Taehyung's head tilted slightly, always toward him, even in sleep. But when Taehyung finally did speak, his voice was a thread in the stillness. I think I forgot what peace felt like. Jungkook pressed his cheek to the top of Taehyung's head. I think I thought I didn't deserve it. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was a shared exhale. Do you think we'll be able to keep this? Taehyung asked after a while, his fingers curling gently into the fabric of Jungkook's shirt. Jungkook didn't answer immediately. He watched the stars blink overhead, watched the steam rise from their untouched cups on the porch table, the low flicker of the lantern's flame reflecting in Taehyung's dark eyes. I don't want to live like we're waiting for it to end, Jungkook finally said. I just want to live with you. Taehyung smiled at that, a real one, the kind that lived in his eyes, stretching through every line of his face. Then let's stop waiting. The next morning came like warmth uncoiling. They woke tangled in each other, the bedsheets twisted at their feet, the soft hum of birdsong trickling in from the window. Taehyung stirred first, pressing his nose to Jungkook's shoulder and letting the scent of skin and sleep ground him. He didn't want to move, didn't want the moment to disappear beneath the weight of the day. But Jungkook opened his eyes slowly, already smiling, and whispered, "You're starring." Taehyung nudged him. "You drooled on my chest." "You're welcome." They stayed in bed longer than they should have, and when they finally ventured into the tiny kitchen, the old poet who owned the guest house was already sitting outside, smoking his morning pipe. He raised an eyebrow when he saw them, eyes twinkling. "You too," he said in Korean, voice rough like the gravel path beneath their feet. "You look like something the world tried to break but couldn't." Jungkook bowed slightly. "We're still learning." The old man nodded. "Keep learning, that's all love really is." They left the guest house 2 days later, not because they had to, but because something inside them had shifted. They were no longer hiding from the world. They were ready to walk into it again, with heads high, shoulders aligned, and no fear of being seen. When they returned to Seoul, it was raining. Fitting, because everything had started in the rain. They stood outside Jungkook's building for a long moment, water trailing down their jackets, their hair damp, but neither of them moving to escape it. The city buzzed quietly around them, cars, distant horns, neon signs flickering against puddles on the ground. "I don't want to disappear again," Taehyung said, his voice soft, steady. Jungkook reached for his hand without hesitation. "Then don't." They walked into the building together. The days that followed were a series of quiet revolutions. Fans had already begun to whisper louder. News outlets speculated. Stylists raised eyebrows. Other members, those closest to them, started looking at them differently but not unkindly. There were questions in their eyes, yes, but also relief. It was Jimin who finally pulled Jungkook aside one evening, the studio dim, and filled with the low thrum of an unfinished beat looping through the monitors. "Are you okay?" Jimin asked, eyes searching. Jungkook hesitated, then nodded, more than okay. Jimin exhaled, jaw tight. "Good, because you deserve to be, you both do." Jungkook looked down. "I was scared to tell you." "You didn't need to, I saw it before either of you did." Jimin smiled then, faint but sincere, "And I was just waiting for you to stop running." Later that week, during a private listening session for their upcoming album, Jungkook and Taehyung sat side by side, a demo track playing softly in the background. It wasn't a song about love. Not exactly. It was about resilience, about longing, about finding a way back to yourself through someone else. When it ended, the room was quiet. The producer leaned forward. "Who wrote this?" Taehyung's voice didn't waver. "We did, together." It wasn't challenged. They released the track without a feature. No music video, just a black and white photo of the sky between two buildings. The lyrics were posted in full. Fans cried, some in joy, some in grief, but all of them felt it. And then came the interview. The one Jungkook had agreed to only on the condition that no questions would be off limits. The journalist was kind but curious. She asked about the music, the direction, the shift in tone. And then, delicately, she asked, "There's a deep emotional thread in this album. Was that inspired by someone in particular?" Jungkook smiled, not a performative one, but real. "Yes." "Are they here tonight?" He glanced to his left, to where Taehyung sat off camera, sipping water, quietly observing. And then, without breaking eye contact with the journalist, Jungkook said, "They never really left." Taehyung met his gaze across the room. He didn't smile, but his eyes burned with everything they hadn't said in public until now. Gratitude, pride, love. The interview went viral before it even aired. Snippets, quotes, speculations, reactions. The internet cracked itself open trying to make sense of something that had always been just beneath the surface. But they didn't care anymore. They had their own world now. On nights when the noise got too loud, they would retreat to the rooftop, wrapped in the same shared hoodie, lying back against the cool concrete, fingers threaded between them. They spoke less these days, not out of silence, but because so much was already understood. "Do you regret it?" Taehyung asked once, voice barely louder than the wind. "Regret what?" "Not saying it sooner." Jungkook turned toward him. "If I'd said it then, we might have broken differently, quietly, bitterly. And now we're stronger than everything that tried to bury us." Taehyung nodded. "Then, I think I love you more now." Jungkook's breath caught. "Why now?" "Because now I see the version of you who's not trying to prove anything, just being." Jungkook rolled over and kissed him then, slow, like punctuation on a story still being written. And maybe that was the truth of it all. They weren't perfect. They weren't invincible. But they were here. Still. Together, that week, Jungkook turned off his notifications entirely. He deleted every app that didn't bring him closer to his music or to Taehyung. For once, he chose silence not as an escape, but as an act of preservation. The noise didn't deserve his energy. His peace was too hard-earned to be diluted by curiosity dressed as concern. He focused on the sound of real things. Taehyung humming while brushing his teeth, the clatter of chopsticks against ceramic as they ate late into the night, the rain tapping against the windows when they held each other without speaking. It was mid-afternoon when the doorbell rang. Neither of them moved at first. They were on the floor, surrounded by takeout containers, half a melody scribbled on the back of a receipt, and the warm stillness of time well spent. Jungkook finally got up, stretching, and padded barefoot to the door. A letter. Handwritten, no sender. Just their names written together in one neat line across the front, Jiyeon Jungkook and Kim Taehyung. He brought it back inside. The paper soft and worn like it had been held too long by someone unsure whether to send it at all. Taehyung took it from his hands and opened it carefully. Inside, just a single page. "You two saved my life, not because you're perfect, but because you chose to love anyway. You made the quiet ones like me believe that maybe, just maybe, we're not too much to be seen." Neither of them spoke. Taehyung folded the letter slowly, fingers trembling. "It's happening," he said finally. "They're seeing us." Jungkook nodded, "And they're still with us." There was nothing more to say. But everything changed after that. Not all at once, but undeniably. Their team began treating them differently, cautiously at first, then curiously, then with a kind of distant admiration that came from watching someone do something impossible and live to tell the story. The public was louder, some cruel, some supportive, some confused, but the one thing they all had in common was that they were watching. Jungkook had never felt so exposed. But this time it didn't feel like punishment, it felt like truth. The night before their next live broadcast, he sat on the floor of their shared studio space, guitar in hand, staring at a lyric sheet for a song he hadn't finished. Taehyung came in without knocking, 2 cups of green tea balanced carefully in his hands. "You're not sleeping again," he said softly. "I can't turn my head off," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung sat beside him and passed him a cup. "Then, give your thoughts a voice." Jungkook set the guitar aside and leaned back against the wall, eyes fixed on a point just above the window. "They're going to ask again tomorrow." "I know. And I don't want to lie." "You don't have to. But I don't want them to use us either." "They already are," Taehyung said. "They always will. But the difference now is that we're not letting them write the ending." Jungkook turned to him. "Then let's write it ourselves." The next day, the live stream began like all the others. Smiles, questions, a few jokes, but everyone felt it, the shift in the air, like something was about to give. It was Taehyung who said it. Unscripted, unrehearsed, simple. Before we end today, there's something I want to say. Jungkook turned toward him, breath caught. I'm grateful to be making music, Taehyung continued, and I'm even more grateful to be doing it beside someone I trust with my whole heart. The room was silent. Taehyung looked at Jungkook then, just looked, long and full and without blinking. Jungkook reached over and took his hand. And held it. On camera. Live. There were no words after that. They didn't need them. The chat exploded, comments pouring in faster than anyone could read. Screenshots were taken, videos clipped, threads born, but none of it touched them, not really. They ended the stream with laughter. Not because they had told the world everything, but because they finally hadn't hidden anything. That night back at home, Jungkook lay beside Taehyung, face pressed to his chest, listening to the steady rhythm beneath his skin. What happens now? He whispered. Taehyung ran a hand slowly through his hair. We live. Jungkook tilted his head. And what if it gets hard again? It will, Taehyung said simply, but we've already learned how to stay. Jungkook smiled against his skin. He thought about the long road that had brought them here, about the anger, the silence, the missed birthdays, the poems never sent, the lyrics left unfinished, and the way, despite all of it, they had always found their way back, guided by instinct, by memory, by something deeper than language or fame. In the end, it wasn't the world that had broken them. It was the fear of being seen. And now, in the quiet dark of their shared apartment, under the sheets, and among all the unsaid dreams they'd finally given voice to, Jungkook realized what love actually meant. It meant staying. Through the noise, through the fear, through the nights of silence and the mornings of apology, through the interviews and the questions and the pressure to be everything to everyone. Love, real love, meant choosing the same person again every day. And Taehyung had chosen him. Just as he had chosen Taehyung. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. And in the stillness of that night, beneath a city that would never stop watching, Jungkook closed his eyes. And finally slept. The morning was quiet in that special way only shared silences can be, where no words were needed because the warmth of the person beside you was already the answer to every question. Jungkook blinked awake slowly, light seeping through the gauzy curtain like a whisper, his cheek pressed against the skin of Taehyung's shoulder, chest rising and falling under the soft thrum of sleep. For a while he didn't move. He didn't want to. He simply listened to the steady, grounding rhythm of Taehyung's breathing and let it wrap around him like a familiar song. Eventually Taehyung stirred. His hand moved lazily, finding Jungkook beneath the blanket, fingers curling until they locked without effort. You awake? Taehyung's voice was raspy and low, like gravel smoothed by water. Only because I didn't want to miss this. Taehyung opened one eye, smiling sleepily. Miss what? This, Jungkook murmured, kissing the inside of his wrist. This moment, this morning, you. There was something in Taehyung's expression that softened then, like an old ache dissolving, and he shifted to face Jungkook fully, hand brushing the strands of hair from his eyes. I used to dream about mornings like this, he said, back when we were pretending. I used to write songs about them, Jungkook whispered, and then hide them. Will you sing them to me now? Jungkook nodded, someday all of them. They stayed in bed until noon, talking about nothing and everything, about the past that used to haunt them and the future they were now brave enough to imagine. When they finally emerged into the world outside their apartment, they did it hand in hand, not because it was performative, but because it was who they had become. There was no announcement, no press release, no carefully worded label to place over their heads. There was just this, two people walking down the street as if love had always been a simple thing. The city looked different to Jungkook now, not because it had changed, but because he had. The cafes, the corners, the alleyways, they no longer felt like traps filled with rumors or shadows of what he couldn't say. They felt like places he could breathe. They met Jimin for lunch near the Han River. It was quiet on the patio, the air cool but kind, and Jimin hugged them both tightly like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I saw the stream," he said, eyes twinkling. "Took you long enough." Jungkook grinned. "Yeah, it took losing him once." Jimin's gaze shifted to Taehyung, who smiled but didn't speak. Instead, he reached out and gently placed his hand over Jungkook's on the table, grounding him with that one gesture. "I'm proud of you," Jimin said, "both of you." They didn't make a scene. They didn't talk about the reaction online. They didn't need to. It was already happening everywhere. The messages, the art, the videos, the fans who saw themselves in their quiet resilience. Some left, some stayed. Some found pieces of their own healing in the spaces Jungkook and Taehyung had carved out for honesty to finally live in the open. That night, Jungkook stood at the window, city lights blinking in the distance, a quiet storm building somewhere far off, just enough to tinge the sky with warning. He watched it for a long time, his hand cradling a mug of warm tea, until Taehyung came to stand behind him, arms wrapping around his waist, chin resting against his shoulder.